What happens after Putin is not a parlor game. It is the logic of a dying empire. Dynasties need heirs, but modern autocracies breed only rivals and debts. I'm Elvira Bary. I was born in the USSR, and today we are going inside Russia's real Game of Thrones to see why Putin's dynasty ends with him. Here's our roadmap. First, the USSR as a modernist project. The communists once imagined a radiant future. Why did their paradise collapse into fear and scarcity instead? Second, the new Middle Ages. How a country that claimed to leap into the future slipped backward into rigid hierarchy and sacred dogma. Third, today's neo-feudal Russia. Why Putin's Russia is less a modern state and more a kingdom of clans, patrons, and vassals. 4. The succession problem. Monarchs pass crowns to heirs. Dictators pass debts and enemies. Why Putin's children can't inherit. 5. A kingdom of trouble. What any successor would face. Not stability or loyalty, but an empire cracking from within. 6. Putin's obsession with immortality. From shamans to science labs, why Putin clings to the fantasy of outliving his own collapse. 7. The pretenders to the throne. The rogues gallery of contenders, insiders, hawks, technocrats, and why each one is flawed. Quick support note before we dive in. Please subscribe, click the bell, and like this video. It really helps. You can also join my think tank for deep dives, leave a super thanks, or support via Buy Me a Coffee or PayPal. Let's begin. The modernist project of the Bolsheviks. A little over 100 years ago, in 1917, the Bolsheviks believed they had made a great leap forward. At that time, almost every country in the world, except the United States, was ruled by conservative elites who clung to the past. They wanted to keep things exactly as they were, because they were the ones benefiting from it. America was too far away, too expensive to reach, and too alien to imitate. Whoever left for the New World rarely came back. So the American experiment remained distant, strange, and irrelevant. The Bolsheviks thought they could do better. Their breakthrough, as they saw it, was to build a modernist project, one oriented not toward traditions and the past, but toward the future. Of course, this future looked a lot like heaven to a religious sect, a paradise of equality and abundance where everyone lived in harmony. But dreams like that don't last long in politics. Very soon, the Bolsheviks discovered the brutal truth. If you don't crush your political rivals without mercy, you lose power. And very likely, your head as well. And that threat was real, because none of their economic experiments worked. Whatever they tried, the treasury stayed empty and the people stayed poor. This went on for decades until the 1960s, when massive reserves of oil and gas were discovered in Western Siberia. That changed everything. The Soviet rulers quietly began selling natural resources to the West, earning hard currency in secret, and using that money to prop up their regime. It was an ugly model, shameful even, and that's why they never talked about it. But it was the foundation that kept the Soviet project alive far longer than it otherwise could have survived. The new Middle Ages. The Soviet elite abandoned their modernist dreams and dragged the country back into the past. Before World War II, life in the USSR still resembled a kind of religious commune. People worshipped the sacred scripture of Marxism-Leninism and revered their spiritual leaders like saints. You can find what it was like in my novel The Prince of the Soviets. But after the war, the Soviet Union began to look more and more like a medieval kingdom. Land, resources, everything in the country belonged to the supreme ruler who could dispose of it all as he pleased. State ideology hardened into an official religion that no one dared to question. Ordinary citizens could not leave the country without special permission, and the elite, in exchange for their loyalty, enjoyed privileges unimaginable for the rest of the population. It was a rigid hierarchy, a closed caste system. At the top stood the nomenklatura, an aristocracy in all but name, while everyone else was expandable material. In theory, the Soviet rulers still praised revolution and the radiant future. In practice, they crushed anything that smelled of real innovation. The modernist project had given way to one of the most conservative systems imaginable. We often say the Soviet Union collapsed, but that's not quite true. Yes, large territories broke away. Yes, communist ideology was abandoned. Private property appeared, and ordinary people finally had the chance to earn money on their own. But the structure of power itself barely changed. The old top layer of the party elite did retreat, but only to make room for the second and third tiers of the nomenklatura. Look closely at the biographies of today's top Russian officials, and you'll find that nearly all, except Putin himself, are the children of those old nomenklatura families. And almost all share one key trait: experience in foreign trade or foreign intelligence. Why does this matter? Because in both the USSR and modern Russia, contact with the outside world, especially the West, was a rare and valuable privilege. It created wealth, connections, and leverage. And those who held this privilege were always the ones who could rise to supreme power. So, yes, the Soviet Union broke apart, but the feudal state survived. The names shuffled, the slogans changed, yet the system remained. Feudal in spirit, feudal in structure, and feudal in soul. The problem of succession. The system I've just described, Russia's modern feudalism, is extremely stable. Why? Because those who are dissatisfied have no tools to destroy it. Supreme power holds the money, the army, the police, and the intelligence services. Ordinary citizens have none of these things. No weapons, no organizations, no tradition of forming independent institutions, and often not even the knowledge of what an alternative might look like. The privileged class makes sure this never changes. Modern Russian rulers don't think about the future. They have no ideology except a hollow patriotism. But by patriotism, they mean not the well-being of citizens, but the preservation of a system that gives them unearned privileges. Support the system, and you are a patriot. Criticize it, and you are branded a foreign agent, even an enemy of the state. So, yes, a feudal autocracy has plenty of tools to suppress resistance, but it has one fatal weakness. In medieval kingdoms, succession was simple. Everyone knew who the heir was. A crown prince existed, and upon the ruler's death, the throne passed automatically. In modern autocracies, this is the most fragile link in the chain. The kings of the Middle Ages ruled by divine right, as if God himself had chosen them. But Putin and his fellow autocrats came to power not by divine appointment, but through years of ruthless struggle, backroom deals, and personal networks. And those networks cannot be inherited like a crown. Family, in fact, is often the weak spot of every strong man. The same personality type that allows an autocrat to wield cruelty and climb to supreme power makes him a poor father. His children grow up in golden cages, hidden from rivals and from the public eye so that no one can use them as leverage. Even when a dictator tries to introduce his children into politics, it rarely works. Consider Lukashenko from Belarus and his son Kolya. The boy may stand alongside his father at parades, but does anyone really believe he inspires loyalty among the elite? The shadow of a domineering father crushes the child's identity. For hereditary succession to succeed, several factors must align. First, the heir must have the personality suited for authoritarian rule. Second, the elites must accept him. And third, the general feeling in the air must suggest that society too accepts him. Not opinion polls, something deeper, almost instinctive. This formula has worked in small, homogeneous states. In Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev inherited power from his father Haydar, backed by a nation of 10 million people, overwhelmingly Azerbaijani, and by the family's grip on oil wealth. In North Korea, the Kim dynasty endures thanks to near total ethnic homogeneity, a population small enough to intercarnate, and the steady support of China. When nearly everyone associates their identity with the ruling family, rejecting the heir feels like rejecting oneself. But Russia is the opposite. A vast, diverse empire of more than 140 million people, divided by ethnicity, religion, culture, and way of life. Here, many citizens cannot identify with a single majority. This creates fracture points. And wherever there is division, ambitious elites will exploit it, putting forward their own contenders for the throne. The only way to avoid this is to defy the ruling family, as the Kims did in North Korea. But Putin has no such luxury. His eldest children are women, and in Russia's political tradition, female heirs is not taken seriously, especially since they are not Margaret Thatcher's. His legitimate daughter lives abroad and has no interest in returning. His sons with Alina Kabaeva, the gymnast, are still children, their future uncertain. Most importantly, Putin has no divine legitimacy to pass on. Russia is a secular state. Whatever personal beliefs Putin harbor about fate or higher powers, the people see nothing sacred in him or in his children. They may support him today, but that does not mean they would ever recognize his heirs tomorrow. And that is the heart of the succession problem. Autocracy can crush dissent, but it cannot guarantee continuity. The problem kingdom. A stable political system rests on institutions. That means it does not matter who sits in the chair. Rules and laws force even fools and villains to act within limits. Institutions protect a country from the worst instincts of its rulers. But in Russia, things are arranged differently. If a man holds supreme power, no rules apply to him. No law restrains him. He can commit any crime that serves his interests here and now, and he does so without hesitation. This is why succession becomes nearly impossible. Putin cannot easily hand power to anyone outside his family because his inheritance is not just vast resources. It is also a mountain of problems. Whoever takes his place will inherit both. And logically, that successor will need to explain why things are collapsing. The simplest explanation will be to blame the man who came before. If Putin were leaving behind a prosperous state, it would be different. An heir could present himself as the natural continuation of success, but Putin's Russia is nothing of the sort. The longer a ruler stays in power, the further he drifts from his people. He becomes isolated, physically, informationally, intellectually. Surrounded only by billionaires and foreign dignitaries, he loses touch with what ordinary citizens endure, and no one dares to tell him the truth. Access to the ruler's ear is a sacred resource, and his inner circle fights to fill those few hours of attention with their own needs, not the grievances of insignificant nobodies. So, solving real problems is not even on the agenda. Only one issue matters: prolonging power. And here lies the system's fragility. In a structure built around a single man, everyone dreads losing him, because after him comes chaos. This is what always happens when a brutal autocrat without divine legitimacy destroys institutions and eliminates rivals who might otherwise stabilize the state after his death. Now, imagine the vacuum of power after Putin. Each faction controls some fragment of the state. One group holds the Central Election Commission, another commands the media, the FSB, the Investigative Committee, the Prosecutor's Office. Each has its own turf. And all of them will scramble to sideline competitors, fearing that under the next regime, they themselves will be pushed out in favor of the new ruler's favorites. Elections won't solve anything. They are stage plays, not real contests. Rotation of power is impossible because the mechanisms have been destroyed. Laws are applied selectively only against enemies. Parliament doesn't govern. It merely rubber stamps whatever decrees are handed down, often without even reading them. The result will be paralysis of the state, and paralysis will spill into economic crisis. When the economy falters and power fragments, people eventually pour into the streets. Yes, Russia has a deep tradition of sitting it out at home. Better to survive quietly than to risk everything. But today, Russia is full of men who no longer fear violence. They have been hardened by the war, trained in killing, and accustomed to blood. These are young men who will want privilege, status, and wealth, and they will be ready to take it by force. Their hands will not tremble. After all, they have already killed Ukrainians who look and sound almost exactly like their fellow citizens. Putin and Immortality. From everything we've seen, it's clear Putin's departure would not just mean his own downfall. It would mean the collapse of everything: his power, his friends' fortunes, the security of those closest to him. That is why, for Putin, the question of succession is a trap. The Russian press loves to speculate who will come after Putin, but he refuses to answer because he knows the moment he points to someone, the clans will immediately begin shifting their loyalty to the heir, ignoring the aging president who dragged the country into war and economic ruin. So instead of preparing for a successor, Putin obsesses over outlasting death itself. To a Western observer, the idea of a dictator chasing immortality, seeking elixirs of life, funding longevity research, even consulting shamans sounds like medieval fantasy. Something ripped from the pages of an old chronicle. But inside Russia's system, it makes perfect sense. If you know that after Putin comes chaos, then everyone, Putin, his cronies, his bureaucrats, his business elites, even much of the population, has one shared goal: delay the day of reckoning for as long as possible. At the top of society, nearly everyone is trying to do three things. First, deny that horrors of Ukraine and the repression at home have anything to do with their personal fate. Second, convince themselves that Russia is simply too vast and too rich to collapse. Third, do whatever it takes to preserve the status quo just a little longer. This logic fits straight into Putin's obsession with longevity. He pours vast sums into life extension research. His daughter, Maria Vorontsova, is directly involved in biohacking studies. After all, who else could be trusted with something so sensitive? State-owned giants, run by his loyal friends, funnel money into these projects. But Putin's quest for immortality does not stop with laboratories. He is, in his own way, a mystical man. He sincerely believes in the otherworldly. He consults shamans. He listens to priests from different faiths. Holy men, miracle workers, spiritual practitioners are flown in to meet him. For Putin, this is not classic religion. It's a patchwork of orthodox pilgrimages, shamanic rituals, and esoteric practices, all stitched together by his fear of death. And history has seen this before. Consider Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a united China, the man who built the famous terracotta army. He conquered his rivals, expanded endlessly through war, and then, near the end, turned his gaze to immortality. He summoned magicians, alchemists, men who promised miracles. He swallowed elixirs. He sought secrets from the gods, but none of it saved him. He died suddenly, and because the empire he built rested only on his shoulders, the structure collapsed soon after. The pretenders to the throne. Before the war, the ratings of Russia's politicians looked predictable. At the top, of course, Vladimir Putin, far ahead of everyone else. Behind him came two figures, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Today both are finished. Lavrov has aged rapidly, his health declining with persistent rumors of heavy drinking. And foreign affairs, a disaster. Shoigu has fared no better. Burned out, disgraced by the catastrophic failures of Russian war in Ukraine. Putin spares him punishment, not out of kindness, but out of strategy. In Putin's circle, the closest allies are never punished, no matter how badly they fail. That way, none of them will switch sides to save themselves. Instead, their deputies take the fall. Shoigu's have been imprisoned in waves. So if not them, then who? Let's examine the main types of possible heirs, each one flawed, but each one representing a real possibility. First, the successful insider. Russia's next ruler will need at least some aura of achievement, especially after the war ends in what will ultimately be remembered as a defeat, no matter how many eastern Ukrainian territories Russia temporarily occupies. One man fits this profile, Moscow's mayor, Sergei Sobyanin. Moscow, under his leadership, has undeniably improved. Corruption is everywhere, of course, but Moscow's budget is so vast that after the scheming, enough remains for visible progress. The city gleams with new parks, renovated streets, and bustling restaurants. Just yesterday, a Moscow friend told me, everything is fine here. Stores are full, money flows. She ignores the closures in the provinces, the gasoline shortages, the factory shutdowns. She doesn't want to know. And millions of Muscovites live in the same bubble. In Russia, it is the capital that decides power. If Irkutsk rebels, Moscow shrugs. But if Moscow rebels, the regime trembles. That makes Sobyanin significant. He avoids direct association with the war, which shows shrewdness. If he secures support from the security services and crafts the right public image, he could win a landslide. His flaw? Age. At 67, he represents the old guard. And in today's Russia, the youth resent the elders who sent them to die in Ukraine while staying safe at home. Second, the chosen successor. This scenario unfolds only if Putin becomes too ill to govern but still able to bless a replacement, someone who guarantees his immunity. Before the war, one name circulated, Alexei Dumin, Putin's former bodyguard turned regional governor. But here lies the trap. Putin's hand-picked heir will be smeared with Putin's crimes. If Putin escapes into the grave, the successor remains to face judgment, a poisoned gift. The security hawk. This camp centers on Dmitry Patrushev, son of former FSB chief Nikolai Patrushev, still a powerful figure. Patrushev Jr. is backed by men like Igor Sechin, Putin's oil tycoon, but hawks thrive on violence and property grabs. Their rise means endless wars and purges, and most of the elite doesn't want that. They want their yachts, their villas, and their money abroad. The hawks threaten all of it. If the chance comes, other factions will unite to crush them. Fourth, the economic candidate. This is where figures like Denis Manturov emerge, the deputy prime minister who once served as industry and trade minister. Behind him stands Sergei Chemizov, Putin's longtime KGB comrade from Dresden, now head of Rostech, the state defense giant. This is the oligarch bloc, the technocrats and industrial barons who might rally around a figure promising stability, not ideology. But their power is fragile, dependent on corruption and the stability of the military-industrial complex. Fifth, the dark horse, the unknown candidate. This would require either the army or the streets to rise, but for the army to matter, several conditions must be met. A Russian defeat at the front, an awareness that Russia is collapsing, the emergence of a charismatic commander, and an armed movement to unite behind him. None of this exists today. The same goes for street protest. For it to matter, the illusion of normal life in Moscow and St. Petersburg must shatter. People must feel the system failing. Right now, they do not. And the one man who might have filled that role, Alexei Navalny, is dead. His followers, as often happens, turned on one another, squandering credibility. So what do we have? A rogues gallery. Sobyanin, competent but old. Dumin, loyal but tainted. Patrushev, dangerous hawk. Manturov, technocrat with shadowy patterns. And faint hope for a dark horse who does not yet exist. None of these options inspire confidence. Each carries risks, weaknesses, and ghosts of failure. So let me ask you, in this gallery of flawed contenders, who do you think Russia could tolerate as its next ruler? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your instincts. And if you love history and want to understand what's happening inside Europe's last empire, look for my Russian Treasures series on Amazon. It's not just analysis, it's an epic saga with unforgettable characters, meticulous details, and the trauma of people fighting to outwit a system determined to crush them. If you have already read my books, please leave a review. That makes Amazon spread knowledge further. Thank you for watching and for being part of this journey.